My wife, Catherine, has always been careless with her belongings. Coffee cups left on counters, keys misplaced daily, jackets draped over chairs instead of hung in closets. After 12 years of marriage, I'd learned to quietly clean up after her rather than start another argument about organization. The last big fight we'd had about her mess was 3 months ago, when I'd found her laptop charger tangled up in wet towels in the laundry basket. That Wednesday evening in March, I was hanging her navy blazer in the hall closet when I felt the crumpled paper in the right pocket. Nothing unusual. Catherine often stuffed receipts, grocery lists, or random notes into her pockets and forgot about them. Last week, I'd found a grocery receipt from 2 months ago and the business card of a massage therapist she'd never mentioned visiting. I almost threw the paper away without looking, but something made me smooth it out on the kitchen counter under the bright pendant lights. It was a funeral program. The cover showed a professional headshot of a man I'd never seen before, Robert Rodriguez, age 42. He had kind eyes and a warm smile, the type of photo you'd see on a company website or LinkedIn profile. The dates below his photo showed he'd lived from 1981 to 2023, dying just last Tuesday. Inside, the program listed survivors, beloved wife Margaret Rodriguez and devoted brother David Rodriguez. The service had been held at St. Mary's Catholic Church, with burial at Mountain View Cemetery. At the bottom, someone had written in blue ink with careful handwriting, "Thank you for being there, David. -M." I stared at the program for a long moment, turning it over in my hands. The paper was thick, expensive stock, the kind used for formal events. The photo was professionally done, and the biographical information inside mentioned Robert's work as an electrical engineer and his volunteer coaching with youth baseball. This wasn't some distant acquaintance. This was someone's carefully planned memorial. Catherine had never mentioned knowing anyone named Robert Rodriguez. When I'd asked about her Tuesday evening 3 days ago, she'd said she was at book club at Susan Martinez's house, same as every week for the past 2 months. She'd even complained about how Susan always made the book selections too literary and pretentious. "Hey babe, what's that?" Catherine's voice startled me. She'd come back downstairs in her pajamas, hair pulled into a messy bun, carrying the romance novel she'd been reading before bed. I held up the program. "Found this in your jacket pocket." "Robert Rodriguez?" Her expression didn't change, but she paused just a beat too long before answering. It was the same hesitation I'd noticed last month when she'd claimed to be working late but came home smelling like cigarettes. Catherine had quit smoking 5 years ago. "Oh, that. Susan's neighbor passed away. She asked me to pick up some programs from the church for his family. Sad story. Car accident." "You went to the funeral?" "No, just stopped by the church on my way to book club." Susan said the family needed extra programs for out-of-town relatives. Catherine took the program from my hands and glanced at it briefly, her fingers tracing the edge. Poor guy. Only 42. Susan said he left behind a wife and his brother who'd been living with them. She kissed my cheek, her lips cold from the bathroom air. "Coming to bed soon?" "Yeah, just finishing up some emails for the Morrison claim." "Don't stay up too late. You've been working such long hours lately." But I wasn't finishing emails. I was studying that handwritten note at the bottom of the program. The writing looked distinctly feminine, with careful loops and precise letter spacing. The ink was slightly smudged, as if the writer had been emotional. It seemed odd that a neighbor would ask Susan to have Catherine pick up funeral programs, especially since Susan lived clear across town from St. Mary's. I'd driven past that church hundreds of times going to clients' houses. It was at least 20 minutes from Susan's neighborhood. I also couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen that handwriting before, though I couldn't place where. The next morning, I waited until Catherine was in the shower before calling Susan Martinez. The shower ran for exactly 12 minutes every morning. Catherine was nothing if not consistent in her routines. "Thomas? How are you? Is everything okay?" Susan sounded surprised to hear from me. In 12 years of marriage, I'd probably called Susan directly 3 times, usually to track down Catherine when her phone died. Everything's fine. Catherine mentioned she picked up some funeral programs from St. Mary's for you? For your neighbor? Funeral programs? Susan's confusion was evident in her voice. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean. We don't have any neighbors who've passed away recently, thank goodness. Mrs. Henderson is 93, but she's still spry as ever. Just saw her yesterday working in her garden. My stomach tightened. Maybe I misunderstood. Thanks, Susan. Wait, Thomas. Is Catherine okay? She hasn't been to book club in weeks. We've missed her. Janet keeps asking where she is. The shower was still running upstairs. How many weeks? Oh, probably 6 or 7 now, maybe longer. Time flies, you know. I keep meaning to call and check on her, but you know how busy things get. I hope she's not sick. We're reading this fascinating biography of Eleanor Roosevelt this month that I think she'd really enjoy. No, she's fine. Just busy with work stuff. You know how the insurance industry gets during storm season? Of course. Well, tell her we miss her terribly. Book club isn't the same without her insights. She always had such interesting perspectives on the characters' motivations. After hanging up, I sat in my car in our driveway for 10 minutes, engine off, trying to process what I'd learned. Catherine had been lying about book club for over a month, maybe longer. Where had she been going every Tuesday evening? And why lie about something as innocuous as skipping book club? I thought back to the past few weeks. Catherine had seemed different lately, more distracted, more secretive about her phone. She'd started taking calls in the other room and had changed her phone passcode from our anniversary date to something I didn't know. When I'd asked about it, she'd said the bank required more complex passwords for their app. During my lunch break Thursday, I drove to Mountain View Cemetery. The address was easy to find online, and the cemetery office gave me directions to Section C without asking questions. It took me 20 minutes to locate Plot 47, where Robert Rodriguez was buried. The grave was easy to spot. Fresh earth, new headstone, and a beautiful arrangement of white lilies with a small card tucked among the stems. The headstone was granite, expensive-looking, with an engraved photo of Robert that matched the funeral program. Below his name and dates, it read, "Beloved husband, brother, and friend. His light lives on in all who knew him." I glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then pulled out the card from the flowers. It read, "Until we meet again. Always, Margaret and David." The handwriting was identical to the note on the funeral program. The same careful loops, the same pen pressure. But more than that, as I studied the writing more closely, I realized where I'd seen it before. The Christmas cards Catherine had written to my mother last year. The grocery lists she left on our refrigerator. This was Catherine's handwriting. Sad sight, isn't it? An older man in work clothes approached, carrying a rake and wearing a faded baseball cap. His name tag read, "Frank Walsh, groundskeeper." Very sad. Did you know him? Not personally, but his family comes by regular. Nice lady and her brother-in-law. Real devoted to keeping his grave tidy. Frank gestured toward the flowers with his rake. They've been here every few days since the burial. Lady always brings fresh flowers, and that fellow David, he talks to the stone like Robert can hear him. Grief hits everyone different, you know? The lady, about 35, brown hair, drives a silver car. That's her. Margaret, I think. Sweet thing, but you can see the sadness in her eyes. Poor woman's taking it real hard. Thank God she's got family support. That David fellow, he's been her rock through all this. Brother-in-law, I think he said. They come together? Sometimes. Sometimes separate. David comes by after work most days. He's in construction, I think. Gets here around 5:30, stays till dark just talking to his brother. Margaret usually comes mornings or weekends. Real devoted, both of them. I thanked Frank and walked back to my car, photographing the grave and the card with my phone. In my line of work as an insurance adjuster, documentation was everything. I'd learned early in my career that evidence spoke louder than assumptions, and right now, I needed evidence. I'd investigated enough fraudulent claims to know that jumping to conclusions without proof was a recipe for disaster. But the handwriting on that card was definitely Catherine's. I was certain of it. That evening, I used my company's database access to look up Margaret Rodriguez. The address came up easily in the property records. 1829 Elm Drive, a modest ranch house about 15 minutes from our neighborhood. Property records showed she'd lived there for 8 years with Robert Rodriguez, who'd been listed as her husband. The house was worth about $180,000 with a mortgage that had 3 years remaining. I also looked up David Rodriguez. He lived at the same address, which made sense if he'd moved in to help Margaret after Robert's death. His employment records showed he worked for Martinez Construction as a foreman, earning decent money. He'd been divorced 6 months ago from his wife of 18 years, with shared custody of 2 teenage children. My professional training kicked in. In insurance work, you learn to gather all available information before drawing conclusions. I'd investigated enough fraudulent claims to know that coincidences were rare, but they did happen. Maybe Catherine had legitimately been helping this grieving family somehow. Maybe she'd met Margaret at work, or through some volunteer organization she'd never mentioned. But the lies about book clubs suggested otherwise. Friday evening, Catherine announced another book club meeting. "Running a bit late," she said, grabbing her purse and keys from the kitchen counter. She'd changed clothes when she got home from work, switching from her usual blouse and slacks to a more flattering sweater and jeans. "Susan's making that complicated pasta dish, so we're starting with dinner first." "Sounds nice. What book are you discussing?" "The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo." "Really good. You'd probably like it. It's about a Hollywood actress and all her secrets." "Maybe I'll pick up a copy." "You should. It's got mystery and romance, right up your alley." Catherine kissed my cheek, her perfume stronger than usual. "Don't wait up. You know how these book discussions can go on forever." After she left, I waited 15 minutes, then drove to Elm Drive. The neighborhood was working class but well-maintained, with small yards and older cars in the driveways. Number 1829 stood out because of the wheelchair ramp leading to the front door and the landscaping that clearly needed attention. Catherine's silver Camry was parked in the driveway, next to a blue Ford pickup truck that looked like it belonged to someone in construction. I parked across the street behind a large SUV where I had a clear view of the living room window. The house was small enough that the front window provided a view of most of the main living area. The curtains were partially open, and I could see Catherine sitting on a couch next to a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair. Even from a distance, their body language was unmistakable. Catherine's hand rested on his thigh. When he leaned forward, covering his face with his hands, she pulled him into an embrace. The hug lasted far too long for casual comfort. I could see her stroking his hair, her lips moving as she spoke to him. When he looked up, their faces were inches apart. I watched for 30 minutes, taking photographs with my phone's zoom feature and noting exact times for each image. The man had to be David Rodriguez, Robert's brother. Catherine stroked his hair while he talked, their heads close together. At one point, she took his hands in hers, their fingers intertwined. When he kissed her forehead, then her lips, my hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. They weren't just comforting each other. They were lovers. I drove home and sat in our kitchen, staring at the photos on my phone. The images were clear enough to leave no doubt about what I'd witnessed. In my work, I'd seen dozens of insurance fraud cases where people constructed elaborate lies to cover their deceptions. The pattern was always the same: multiple false statements, fabricated supporting evidence, and increasing complexity to maintain the deception. Catherine was having an affair with a grieving man whose brother had just died. But there were still too many unanswered questions. How had she met David? How long had this been going on? Why was she involved with this family at all? I needed more information before confronting Catherine. In insurance investigations, premature confrontation often led to destroyed evidence and more sophisticated lies. Saturday morning, Catherine seemed unusually cheerful, humming while she made coffee and suggesting we visit my mother on Sunday. We haven't seen her in weeks, Catherine said, buttering her toast. I'm sure she's wondering where we've disappeared to. Mom understands we're busy. Still, family's important. Maybe we could take her to that new restaurant she mentioned. What was it called? The Garden Bistro? By the way, I said casually, spreading cream cheese on my bagel, I saw in the paper that a Robert Rodriguez died last week. Car accident. Says he has a brother David and a wife Margaret. Tragic for such a young family. Catherine barely looked up from her breakfast. That's terrible. I can't imagine losing someone so young. Those poor people. Says here the burial was at Mountain View Cemetery. Maybe we should send flowers or something. That's sweet of you, Thomas, but we don't even know them. I'm sure they have plenty of support from people who actually knew him. The casual dismissal confirmed what I already suspected. Catherine was a skilled liar, but she wasn't perfect. She'd made one crucial mistake by bringing that funeral program home. You're right. Just feels sad, 42 years old, whole life ahead of him. It is sad. Makes you appreciate what we have. Catherine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I love you, Thomas. I love you too. But even as I said it, I wondered if the woman sitting across from me was someone I'd ever really known. I spent Saturday researching David Rodriguez more thoroughly. Online records showed he was 45, a construction foreman who'd worked for the same company for 12 years. His divorce had been finalized just 3 months before Robert's accident, citing irreconcilable differences. He had 2 children from his marriage, a 17-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter who lived primarily with their mother. Social media searches revealed more details. David's Facebook page was mostly private, but the visible posts showed a man devoted to his family. Photos of him at his kids' sporting events, fishing trips with Robert, family barbecues. The most recent posts were condolences from friends and family about Robert's death. Robert's obituary provided more background. He'd been an electrical engineer at a local power company, married to Margaret for 15 years. He'd coached Little League Baseball and volunteered at a literacy program. By all accounts, he'd been a genuinely good man whose death had left a significant hole in many lives. The timing troubled me. Robert had died on a Tuesday, the same Tuesday Catherine claimed to have been at book club. Had she attended his funeral instead? If so, how had she known him well enough to be invited? Sunday morning, I made my decision. I was going to give Catherine one chance to tell me the truth. Catherine, we need to talk. She was getting dressed for another supposed book club meeting, applying lipstick in our bedroom mirror. Can it wait? I'm already running late, and Janet gets cranky when people show up after she's started the discussion. It's about Robert Rodriguez. She froze, one hand holding the lipstick, meeting my eyes in the mirror. Who? I pulled the funeral program from my desk drawer. You dropped this Tuesday night. It was in your jacket pocket. Catherine turned around, her face pale but her voice steady. Thomas, I have no idea where that came from. Someone must have put it there by mistake. Really? Because I called Susan Martinez. There's been no book club meeting for 6 weeks. Susan's confused. We've been meeting at different people's houses. I also called Margaret Rodriguez yesterday. Told her I was an insurance investigator following up on her husband's accident claim. Catherine sat down heavily on the edge of our bed. Thomas, what are you doing? Margaret mentioned her volunteer grief counselor, Catherine, who's been such a blessing during this difficult time. She told me all about Catherine's professional certification and how Catherine lost her own husband in military service. Funny thing is, I'm still alive, And you've never been certified for anything. Catherine's mouth opened and closed without sound. She also mentioned how supportive Catherine and her brother-in-law David have been. How they understand loss because they've been through it themselves. Thomas, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos from Friday night. David called yesterday, by the way. He wanted to thank you for all your support during this difficult time. Catherine's face crumpled. You're spying on me? Taking pictures of me without my knowledge? That's sick, Thomas. This is exactly why our marriage is falling apart. Our marriage is falling apart because you've been lying to me for weeks while having an affair with a grieving man whose brother just died. It's not an affair. He needed someone, Thomas. His brother was everything to him, and Margaret is barely functioning. I was just trying to help. By telling them you're a licensed grief counselor? By claiming your husband died in combat? Catherine stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard. Margaret needed professional help, and David was completely lost. I studied psychology in college. I know how to help people through trauma. You studied psychology for 1 semester before switching to communications. I was helping them. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch someone fall apart from grief? Margaret couldn't get out of bed for weeks. David was drinking himself into oblivion every night. Someone had to do something. So you decided to play therapist and girlfriend simultaneously? It's not like that. We connected over grief and loss. Catherine, I have photos of you kissing him. Stop lying. She sat down across from me, tears starting to flow. He needed me, Thomas. After Robert died, he was completely broken. Robert wasn't just his brother. He was his best friend, his business partner, his everything. When Robert died, David lost his entire support system. What about Margaret? Margaret was so consumed with her own grief, she couldn't help anyone. She was like a ghost, going through the motions but not really living. David was trying to be strong for her while falling apart himself. And you swooped in to save them both? I met Margaret at the grocery store the Saturday after the funeral. She was standing in the cereal aisle, just crying. She looked so lost, so broken. I couldn't just walk away. How did the grief counselor story start? Catherine wiped her eyes with a tissue from our nightstand. Margaret mentioned that Robert's insurance didn't cover mental health services, and she couldn't afford professional counseling. She was desperate for help but didn't know where to turn. When I offered to talk with her, she asked about my qualifications. So you lied. I exaggerated. I have studied psychology, Thomas. I know about trauma and loss. I've read dozens of books on grief counseling. Reading books doesn't make you a licensed therapist. I was helping her. Within 2 weeks, Margaret was eating regularly again, showering, getting dressed. She started seeing a real doctor about her depression. I made a difference in her life. What about the dead husband story? Catherine looked away. I needed credibility. Margaret was so vulnerable she would have accepted help from anyone, but I wanted her to trust my advice. If I told her I'd been through similar loss, she'd be more likely to listen. And David was there the first time I visited Margaret. He was trying to be strong for her, but he was falling apart inside. His marriage had just ended, his brother was dead, and he was responsible for keeping Margaret functional. We started talking, and you decided you could save him too? I don't know, Thomas. I felt needed, important, like I was making a real difference in someone's life. So you decided to make a difference in his bed? Don't be crude. It wasn't about sex, it was about connection and understanding. And what did you tell David about us? Catherine's tears stopped. What do you mean? David thinks we're separated, doesn't he? That's why he's comfortable having an affair with a married woman. I told him we were having problems. What kind of problems? That you'd become controlling and emotionally distant. that we were sleeping in separate rooms and considering divorce. Are we sleeping in separate rooms? No, but are we considering divorce? We are now, apparently. I stood up and walked to our bedroom window, looking out at the garden Catherine had planted when we first moved into this house. What else did you tell him? I told him I was planning to file for divorce after the holidays, that I was waiting for the right time. So you lied to him too. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I just wanted to help them get through the worst of it, then step back. But David and I, we have a real connection. He understands me in ways you never have. How? What? How does he understand you in ways I don't? Catherine turned from the window, meeting my eyes. He listens to me, Thomas. Really listens. When I talk about my dreams and goals, he doesn't dismiss them as impractical. When I mention wanting to go back to school or start a business, he doesn't immediately list all the reasons it won't work. When have I done that? When I wanted to get my real estate license 2 years ago, you said the market was too competitive. When I mentioned teaching yoga, you said I didn't have the right personality for it. When I talked about starting a catering business, you said we couldn't afford the startup costs. Those were practical concerns, not dismissals. To you, maybe. To me, they felt like you telling me I wasn't capable of achieving anything. So you found someone who would tell you that you were capable of being a licensed therapist? Catherine's face flushed. That's not what happened. What did happen, Catherine? How did you go from comforting a stranger in a grocery store to having an affair with her brother-in-law? I told you. Margaret needed help, and David was... No, I want the real story, not the sanitized version where you're the noble helper. I want to know exactly how this affair started. Catherine sat back down on the bed, looking suddenly exhausted. The first time I visited Margaret, David was there. He'd taken time off work to help her with funeral arrangements and insurance paperwork. He was so gentle with her, patient. He'd make her tea and sit with her while she cried. I could see how much he loved his brother, how devastated he was, but he was putting all his energy into taking care of Margaret. Go on. After that first visit, I started coming by twice a week. Margaret was making progress, but David was getting worse. He wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating much. He'd work all day, then come home and take care of Margaret, then sit up all night drinking and looking at photos of Robert. When did it become romantic? It wasn't sudden. We started talking more, sharing stories about loss and pain. I told him about losing my father when I was 15, how it felt to watch my mother fall apart. He told me about his divorce, how he'd felt like a failure as a husband and father. When did you first kiss him? Catherine was quiet for a long moment. 3 weeks ago. Margaret had gone to bed early and David and I were sitting on the porch. He was telling me about a conversation he'd had with Robert's baseball team. Robert had coached Little League, and the kids had made a memory book for Margaret. David started crying, talking about how Robert would never see these kids grow up, how proud he'd been of them. And you comforted him. I held him while he cried. And then, I don't know, it just happened. He looked at me and I could see how much pain he was in, and I wanted to take it away. So you kissed him. He kissed me first. But I didn't stop him. What happened next? We talked about it. He felt terrible, said he was sorry, that he'd never meant to put me in that position. He said he knew I was married and it couldn't happen again. But it did happen again. The next week, Margaret had a bad day. She'd found Robert's wedding ring in his sock drawer and completely broke down. David called me, said he didn't know what to do. When I got there, Margaret was locked in her bedroom and David was beside himself. So you played therapist again. I helped Margaret through the crisis. We talked about memory triggers and healthy ways to process grief. By the time she went to sleep, she was calmer. David was so grateful, so relieved. He said I was a miracle worker, and you felt special. Yes, I felt needed and capable and important. When did the affair become physical? Catherine's face turned red. Thomas, I don't think... When, Catherine? Last Friday. Margaret had gone to stay with her sister for the weekend, her first time leaving the house since the funeral. David and I were alone in the house, and we were talking about how much progress Margaret had made. David said he couldn't have gotten through this without me, that I'd saved both of them. And then? And then we kissed again. And this time, we didn't stop. I walked back to the window, processing what she'd told me. The affair had been building for weeks, layered with deception and emotional manipulation. Catherine had created a fantasy where she was the savior of a grieving family, the indispensable helper who alone could heal their pain. What's the plan, Catherine? What do you mean? What's the end game? Where do you see this relationship going? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Yes, you have. What does David think is going to happen? Catherine hesitated. He wants us to be together. Officially. And Margaret? David thinks Margaret is getting strong enough to live independently. He wants us to move away together, maybe to California, start fresh somewhere new. And abandon Margaret? Not abandon. Transition her to independence. David says Margaret needs to learn to stand on her own, that our continued presence is actually holding her back from healing. Whose idea was that? It was a mutual decision. Catherine, whose idea was it originally? I may have mentioned that extended family support sometimes prevents proper grief processing. Based on your extensive professional training? Based on research I've done. There are studies that show grieving people need consistent support systems, not abandonment by the people they've learned to trust. Catherine stood up again, her voice rising. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage. When was the last time you really looked at me, Thomas? When did you last ask about my dreams or goals or what makes me happy? When did you last tell me the truth about anything? That's not fair. Fair? I turned from the window to face her. You've been lying to me for weeks. You've been manipulating a grieving woman and sleeping with her brother-in-law. You've created fake credentials and a fictional tragic backstory. What part of this situation do you think is fair? Catherine moved toward the door. I need some air. No, I stepped in front of her. We're finishing this conversation. You have two choices, Catherine. End the affair immediately, tell Margaret and David the truth about everything, and we go to marriage counseling. Or I file for divorce Monday morning. You can't give me ultimatums. I'm not giving you an ultimatum. I'm giving you a choice. But either way, Margaret Rodriguez deserves to know that her trusted grief counselor is a fraud who's been sleeping with her brother-in-law. Catherine's face went white. You wouldn't destroy what they have left. Margaret depends on me. Margaret depends on honesty, something you've forgotten how to give. Thomas, please. David is finally starting to heal. If you expose this now, it'll destroy him. And Margaret, she's just starting to function again. This would devastate her. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to manipulate them. What if I promised to end it gradually? I could slowly reduce my involvement, help them transition to real professional support. No more lies, Catherine. No more manipulation. You tell them the truth, or I will. And our marriage? I looked at my wife of 12 years, seeing clearly for the first time how easily deception came to her. That depends on whether you choose truth or lies. Catherine went to our closet and pulled out a suitcase. I need time to think. How much time? I don't know, a few days, maybe a week. She packed methodically, underwear, work clothes, casual outfits, toiletries. It struck me that she packed like someone planning an extended stay, not a brief cooling off period. Where will you go? Lisa's. Catherine's sister lived about an hour away in a condo complex with a guest room. What are you going to tell her? That we're having marriage problems and need some space. Catherine. She looked up from folding a sweater. This is your last chance to handle this the right way. I know. But even as she said it, I could see in her eyes that she'd already made her choice. Catherine left that afternoon, driving away in her silver Camry with 2 suitcases and a box of personal items. She left me a note on the kitchen counter. Thomas, I need time to figure out what I really want. I'll call you in a few days. Please don't do anything rash while I'm gone. C. The house felt different without her. Quieter, but also somehow lighter. I'd been carrying the weight of her deceptions for days without realizing it. Monday morning, I called Margaret Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Thomas Kellerman. I'm Catherine's husband. Oh, Thomas, Catherine's mentioned you so much. I feel like I know you. I'm so sorry for your loss. Catherine told me about your military service and how difficult the transition has been since you came home. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to tell you something important. My wife has been lying to you. The silence stretched for several seconds. I'm sorry, what? I've never served in the military. I'm very much alive. Catherine has no professional credentials in grief counseling or psychology. She's been deceiving you about everything. That can't be right. Catherine has been so helpful, so professional. She knows so much about trauma and loss. She studied psychology for 1 semester in college before switching majors. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm calling because I care about what happens to you. Catherine has been manipulating you and your family. But she's helped me so much. When I couldn't get out of bed, she got me to eat. When I couldn't face leaving the house, she helped me take small steps. She saved my life. Some of her help may have been genuine. But Mrs. Rodriguez, Catherine has been having an affair with David. Another long silence. That's impossible. Catherine is married to a veteran who died in Afghanistan. She showed me his photo, his military records. Ma'am, I'm very much alive, and I've never been in the military. Catherine showed you fabricated documents. But David would never. He's been so devoted to Robert's memory, so focused on helping me heal. Mrs. Rodriguez, David believes Catherine is separated from her husband and planning to divorce. He has no idea Catherine is lying to both of you. Oh my God. Margaret's voice became very small. What else has she lied about? You'll have to ask her. But I thought you deserved to know the truth. After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot where I'd had my first conversation with Catherine 12 years ago. She'd been working as a secretary for the law firm upstairs, and I'd been investigating a suspicious car accident claim for an insurance company. She'd helped me navigate their filing system and suggested a great restaurant for lunch. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. We need to talk. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, David Rodriguez appeared at my front door. He was bigger than he'd looked through the window, probably 6'3", with calloused hands and tired eyes. He wore work clothes and a faded baseball cap with his construction company's logo. You Thomas Kellerman? Yes. I'm David Rodriguez. We need to talk. I stepped back and let him in. He followed me to the kitchen where he stood with his arms crossed, studying me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Catherine told me you'd filed for divorce and moved out months ago. Catherine told you a lot of things that weren't true. David's jaw tightened. She showed me text messages where you called her worthless, said you'd been having an affair with your secretary. I don't have a secretary. I work alone. She showed me pictures of the apartment you supposedly moved into. Said you'd cleaned out your joint bank account and left her with nothing. David, I've lived in this house for 8 years. Our joint account has exactly the same balance it had 3 months ago. Catherine has been lying to both of us. He sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the same chairs Catherine and I had picked out when we first moved in. Jesus, I never would have. If I'd known you were still married, still living together. I know. Margaret told me Catherine claimed to be a licensed grief counselor. Yeah. Said she'd lost her husband in Afghanistan, went through extensive therapy, got certified to help other people. David rubbed his face with both hands. Man, I feel like such an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're grieving. And Catherine took advantage of that. But why? What did she get out of this? You'll have to ask her. But David, I need you to understand something. Margaret trusted Catherine completely. Catherine wasn't just lying to you. She was manipulating Margaret's recovery for her own purposes. David stood up and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. Margaret liked her so much, said Catherine was the only person who really understood her pain. Catherine seemed to know exactly what to say, exactly how to help. Some of her help might have been genuine, but the foundation was built on lies. Catherine said you were controlling, that you monitored her phone and didn't let her have friends. She said she was scared of what you'd do if you found out about us. Did I seem controlling when I called to give you a chance to learn the truth instead of exposing everything publicly? No, you seemed professional and sad. We stood in silence for a moment. Through the window, I could see the bird feeder Catherine had insisted on hanging last spring. She'd been so excited about attracting cardinals to our yard. David, can I ask you something? How did Catherine suggest handling the situation with Margaret? She wanted us to move away together. Said Margaret was getting stronger and would be fine on her own. Catherine thought we could start fresh somewhere new, maybe California. And leave Margaret alone? Catherine said Margaret needed to learn independence, that our continued presence was actually holding her back. David turned from the window. God, it sounds so wrong when I say it out loud. What did you think about that plan? At first, it made sense. Catherine explained how family dependence can prevent proper healing, how Margaret needed to develop her own coping mechanisms. But last night, after you called Margaret, I realized how wrong it all was. How's Margaret doing today? Better than I expected. She's angry, but she's also relieved. She said she'd been having doubts about Catherine for weeks, but felt guilty questioning someone who was helping her so much. What kind of doubts? Catherine kept pushing Margaret to distance herself from Robert's friends and family. Said they reminded her too much of her loss and prevented healing. Catherine also suggested Margaret sell the house and start over somewhere new. That doesn't sound like standard grief counseling. No, it doesn't. And when Margaret started questioning Catherine's methods, Catherine said Margaret was resisting healing, that she was using her grief as an excuse to avoid growing. David sat back down. A real grief counselor wouldn't shame someone for asking questions, would they? I don't think so. There's something else, Thomas. Catherine had been encouraging Margaret to depend on her for everything: grocery shopping, bill paying, even basic decisions about what to eat or wear. Margaret told me this morning that she'd started feeling like she couldn't function without Catherine's approval. That sounds like creating dependence, not healing. Yeah. And Catherine kept telling me that Margaret was more fragile than she appeared, that I needed to be careful not to upset her. But Margaret's stronger than Catherine ever gave her credit for. How is she handling the truth? She's devastated about being deceived, but she's not falling apart. She's actually taking charge, called a real therapist this morning, started making plans to get back to her normal routine. Margaret's tougher than any of us realized. My phone buzzed with another text from Catherine. Please call me. We can work this out. I showed David the message. She's been texting me all day. She called me too. Left 6 voicemails. I haven't listened to them yet. What are you going to do? Nothing. I can't trust anything she says anymore. David stood to leave. Thomas, I need you to know that I never would have gotten involved if I'd known the truth about your marriage. Catherine showed me fake text messages, fake photos, fake stories about fights you'd supposedly had. What kind of stories? She said you'd thrown her clothes out on the lawn during an argument. Said you'd threatened to have her fired from her job if she left you. She even showed me a photo of what she claimed was a bruise you'd given her. I've never laid a hand on Catherine in anger. I know that now. The way she described you, I expected some kind of monster. But you've been completely reasonable through this whole thing. Catherine's very convincing when she wants something. Yeah, she is, but I keep thinking about something she said last week. She wanted me to ask Margaret to sign over power of attorney for Robert's estate. Said it would help Margaret avoid dealing with legal stress. But it would have given you control over Margaret's finances. And since Catherine thought we were moving to California together, David shook his head. I can't believe I almost went along with it. After David left, I realized how close Catherine had come to completely destroying Margaret's life. If her plans had succeeded, Margaret would have been left alone, isolated from her support system, and possibly defrauded of her inheritance from Robert's estate. That evening, Catherine called. Thomas, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Have you? I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I'm willing to go to counseling, to work on our communication issues. Communication issues? You have to admit, our marriage has been struggling for years. We've grown apart, stopped really talking to each other. Maybe the situation forced us to confront problems we've been ignoring. Catherine, you've been lying to me for months while having an affair with another man. This isn't about communication. But if we can understand why I felt driven to seek connection elsewhere, stop. Just stop. I sat down on our couch, phone pressed to my ear. Do you understand what you did to Margaret and David? I helped them through an incredibly difficult time. You nearly convinced David to abandon his grieving sister-in-law so he could run away with you. You were isolating Margaret from her support system while pretending to be a licensed professional. That's not how it happened. Catherine, I've talked to both of them. They've told me exactly how it happened. Silence. David feels like he almost betrayed his brother's memory. Margaret feels like she was being manipulated by someone she trusted completely. They both feel violated by your deception. I never meant to hurt anyone, but you did. You hurt them, you hurt me, and you hurt yourself. So that's it? 12 years of marriage and you're just throwing it away? I'm not throwing anything away, Catherine. You already threw it away the first time you lied about book club. She hung up. The next morning, Margaret Rodriguez called me. Mr. Kellerman, I wanted to thank you for your honesty. I know it couldn't have been easy. How are you doing, Mrs. Rodriguez? Better than I expected. I'd started having doubts about Catherine weeks ago, but I felt guilty questioning someone who was helping me so much. What kind of doubts? Some of her advice seemed manipulative, like she was more interested in creating drama than helping me heal. She kept insisting I cut ties with Robert's friends and family, said they were holding me back from moving forward. That doesn't sound like standard grief counseling. No, it doesn't. She also pushed me to make major decisions quickly, selling the house, changing jobs, even cutting contact with my own family. When I asked for time to think about these suggestions, she said I was using grief as an excuse to avoid growth. How do you feel about those suggestions now? Horrified. Robert's friends and family have been my lifeline through this. Cutting them off would have left me completely isolated and dependent on Catherine's guidance. What about David? David's doing better than expected, too. He feels terrible about the affair, but he's relieved to know the truth. We've both realized how much Catherine was manipulating our emotions and decisions. I'm glad you have each other for support. Mr. Kellerman, can I ask you something personal? Are you planning to reconcile with Catherine? I don't think so, Mrs. Rodriguez. Trust, once broken this completely, is very difficult to rebuild. I understand. I hope you know that David and I are grateful you exposed the truth. Catherine could have destroyed our family. After hanging up, I realized Margaret was right. Catherine hadn't been helping anyone heal. She'd been systematically isolating them from their support systems while positioning herself as indispensable. If I hadn't discovered her deception, she might have convinced David to abandon Margaret entirely, while also defrauding her of Robert's estate. 2 weeks later, my lawyer Rebecca Stone called with an update on the divorce proceedings. Catherine's attorney is pushing for a lengthy separation period instead of divorce. They're claiming temporary emotional distress due to her father's recent health scare. Her father's been dead for 3 years. I know, I have the death certificate. Her attorney seems to be unaware of this fact. Catherine lied to her own lawyer? It appears so. This actually simplifies things significantly. Lying to your legal counsel tends to complicate their ability to represent you effectively. What's Catherine's position on the settlement? She's demanding spousal support and half the house value, claiming she sacrificed her career to support your insurance business. She works full-time at the insurance agency downtown. Again, her attorney seems unaware of this. Catherine appears to be telling him that she's been a stay-at-home wife for the past 5 years. This is unbelievable. Thomas, I have to ask, are you certain you want to proceed with the divorce? Catherine's behavior suggests someone who might benefit from professional help. Rebecca. Catherine spent weeks manipulating a grieving family while having an affair. She created fake credentials, a fictional dead husband story, and nearly convinced her lover to abandon his brother's widow. This isn't a temporary emotional breakdown. This is who she is. Understood. I'll proceed with the paperwork. 3 days later, David Rodriguez appeared at my office. I'd recently started working more freelance investigations, leveraging my insurance fraud experience to help attorneys and private clients. Thomas, I need to tell you something. What's wrong? Catherine showed up at the construction site yesterday. What did she want? She tried to convince me that you'd threaten to have me arrested for adultery if I didn't stop seeing her. Adultery isn't a criminal offense in this state. That's what my foreman told me. But Catherine seemed to think you had some kind of legal power over me because of your insurance connections. What else did she say? She claimed you'd been stalking her, following her to work and calling her employer with false allegations. She said you were trying to get her fired. Have I contacted her employer? No. But she was very convincing. She even showed me what looked like a restraining order with your name on it. A restraining order? Yeah. It looked official, but something felt wrong about it. The letterhead seemed off and the judge's signature looked, I don't know, fake. Do you still have it? David pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of the document. It was clearly fabricated. Wrong court format, incorrect legal language, and a forged signature. David, this is a fake document. Catherine forged a restraining order. Why would she do that? To manipulate you into thinking I'm dangerous? To make you feel like you need to protect her? From what? From the consequences of her own lies. David sat down across from my desk. There's more. Catherine wants me to move to Florida with her. She says you've made staying here impossible, that we need to start over somewhere you can't find us. What about Margaret? Catherine says Margaret is strong enough now to handle things on her own, that our continued presence is actually preventing her from achieving full independence. And you believe that? I did yesterday. But after talking to Margaret last night, I realized Catherine's been feeding me a completely different story than what's actually happening. What do you mean? Catherine told me Margaret was encouraging our relationship, that she wanted us to be happy together. But Margaret said she had no idea we were involved romantically. She thought Catherine was just a grief counselor who was unusually dedicated to our family. Catherine never told Margaret about the affair? No. Margaret found out when you called her. She was completely shocked. How is Margaret handling that? She feels betrayed, but she's also relieved. She said something had felt wrong about Catherine's advice lately, but she couldn't put her finger on what. What kind of advice? Catherine had been encouraging Margaret to date again, said staying focused on Robert's memory was unhealthy and preventing her from moving forward. Margaret wasn't ready for that, but Catherine kept pushing. That seems premature. Yeah, Margaret's only been widowed for 6 weeks, but Catherine insisted that avoiding new relationships was a form of grief avoidance. Did Catherine suggest anyone specific for Margaret to date? David's face darkened. She introduced Margaret to some guy from her work, said he was a widower who understood loss. Turns out the guy's never been married and was just looking for an easy target. Catherine was trying to set Margaret up with someone? More than that. She encouraged Margaret to lend this guy money for his supposedly sick mother. Margaret almost wrote him a check for $5,000 before I intervened. This keeps getting worse. Thomas, I think Catherine was planning to isolate Margaret completely, then move away with me while this other guy emptied Margaret's bank account. Did you tell Margaret about this? Yeah. She's filing a police report today about the attempted financial fraud. That evening, I called Rebecca Stone with an update. Rebecca, we need to add something to the divorce filing. Catherine may be involved in elder fraud. Explain. I told her about Catherine's attempt to set Margaret up with a con artist who was planning to defraud her. Thomas, this changes things significantly. If Catherine was facilitating financial fraud against a vulnerable widow, that could be criminal conduct. What does that mean for the divorce? It means Catherine's credibility is completely shot. No judge is going to award spousal support to someone who's been running con games on grieving families. The next morning, Catherine called me again. Thomas, we need to meet in person. There are things I need to explain that can't be said over the phone. I'm listening. Not like this. Can you meet me for coffee? Somewhere public, so you'll feel safe? Safe from what? I know you think I'm some kind of monster, but I'm still the woman you married. I still love you. Catherine, you forged a restraining order and showed it to David. Silence. You tried to facilitate financial fraud against a grieving widow. That's not what happened. What did happen? I was trying to help Margaret move forward with her life. She was stuck in the past, refusing to consider any kind of future without Robert. So you introduced her to a con artist? I introduced her to someone I thought might help her see that life goes on. I had no idea he was going to ask for money. But when he did ask for money, you encouraged her to give it to him. I encouraged her to trust her own judgment. Catherine, Margaret's judgment was compromised by grief and your manipulation. You knew that. I was trying to help her become independent. While you ran off to Florida with her brother-in-law? David and I deserve a chance at happiness. Not at Margaret's expense. Margaret will be fine. She's stronger than everyone thinks. That's not your decision to make. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. What do you want from me, Thomas? I want you to stop lying. To everyone, including yourself. I'm not lying. Catherine, I have documented evidence of every lie you've told over the past 2 months. The fake grief counselor credentials, the forged restraining order, the dead husband story, the financial fraud attempt. You've lied to me, to David, to Margaret, to your own lawyer. When does it stop? When you stop trying to destroy my life. I'm not destroying your life. I'm revealing the life you've actually been living. She hung up. 3 months later, I was sitting in my new office. I'd started a private investigation business, leveraging my insurance fraud experience, when I saw Catherine through the window of the cafe across the street. She was sitting with a man I didn't recognize, leaning across the table in intense conversation. The man looked older, well-dressed, wearing what appeared to be an expensive suit. As I watched, Catherine pulled out her phone and showed the man something on the screen. He nodded sympathetically, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Even from a distance, I could recognize the body language. Catherine was telling him some tragic story, positioning herself as a victim who needed his help. When she saw me looking, she quickly stood up, said something to her companion, and they left together. The man looked confused, glancing back at me as Catherine hurried him toward the parking lot. I turned back to my case files. I had real work to do, helping real people uncover real truths. The business was thriving, partly because I'd learned to recognize the patterns of deception so clearly in my personal life. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Rodriguez. Thought you should know. Catherine contacted David last week, claiming she's pregnant and needs his help. David had the sense to ask for medical records before responding. Turns out she's not pregnant. She also tried to get him to co-sign a lease for an apartment in Tampa. Just thought you should be aware in case she tries something similar with you. I saved the message for my attorney and got back to work. My current case involved a man who suspected his business partner of embezzling funds. The evidence was building steadily. Fake invoices, manipulated bank records, fabricated expense reports. It was the same pattern I'd seen with Catherine, just in a different context. Some people would never stop manipulating others to get what they wanted. My job now was helping their victims find the truth, one case at a time. Outside, spring was turning to summer, and I had appointments with 3 new clients who suspected their partners of deception. Each case would be different, but the patterns would be familiar. Lies always left evidence. Trust always had a price. And truth, however painful, was always worth pursuing. I opened the first file and got to work, grateful that Catherine's betrayal had taught me to value honesty above all else. It was an expensive lesson, but it had led me to work that actually mattered, protecting people from those who would exploit their trust and vulnerability. The phone rang with a new client, and I answered with the confidence that comes from hard-won experience. I knew how to find the truth now, and I knew how to help others find it too. In the end, that was Catherine's most valuable gift to me, teaching me the difference between manipulation and genuine care, between lies and love, between fantasy and reality. I had real work to do,